What's up, Brew Crew? It's Ryan, your host of Beer Time. This week we have a little special Q&A with moi, and next week we'll get back to our regular reviews, starting with Bear Moose Brewery in Everett, Massachusetts. I'm gonna give a couple here because this is difficult because there were so many delicious and amazing beers. I will say Harpoon, the Rec League, it threw me off guard because I wasn't expecting sea salt to be a Finnish flavor in that beer. But it was like, for a summer beer, it was like, it had this lime and just this sea salt finish, and it was a light beer, and it just kind of like, it was one of those things that was like, wow, that makes sense. Why hasn't that been a thing? I'd say another beer that really stood out was also Shoveltown, their peanut butter crunch porter. It was delicious because when you get into the peanut butter like stout beers, they get really heavy, and sometimes it's a little bit too much and you can only get through one. Shoveltown had a really nice balance with their peanut butter like crunch, and it just like there was still like that dark, stout like taste that came through that was actually more so than the actual flavor of the peanut butter, which I thought was pleasant because you kind of just want that taste at the end, not like throughout the whole thing. Moving into the fall and winter is probably my favorite transition for the beer season because we all do drink seasonally, especially in New England. We have 4 seasons out here, so with those 4 seasons come the 4 different kinds of beers. We see, winter lagers are going to start coming in place, but you're going to see those in fall. You get back to those, those spice, like caramely darker notes that I just absolutely enjoy. The brown ales, in the Oktoberfest style beers too, the German style beers, that they start to, poke their heads up. Every year, I always have to have a Southern Tier Pumpkin is one of my favorites. It literally tastes like an apple pie. Last year, it was like 2 years ago, they did like a Rum King where they put the pumpkin, their pumpkin style beer into a rum barrel, and it's like just speaking to me. The review we did with Gentilly, I sat down with Paul, and he actually, we sampled some beers that weren't even ready yet, which was cool. And one of them was a squash porter. And I was like, squash, like, yeah, like what, like, why is it always pumpkin? Why not squash? Like, acorn squash is eaten this time of year, especially out here in Thanksgiving. And it's like, and it was good, and it wasn't even ready yet. It wasn't even carbonated yet. So like, we're going to be going back up that way to do another review soon. So I'm going to have to swing over there, and hopefully if he still has some left, I'll have to pick that up. When it comes to brewing styles, there's so many different styles, and you're using so many different yeasts, your hops, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like there's so many different variables where their misconceptions can be created very easily with all the variables that are in place. I myself am still learning a lot about just the German yeasts that come over. We sat down with True North, and the type of yeast that they were bringing in were flavors that I had never, I don't think are really abundant in the US, but they understand, the brew history, especially coming, a lot of it coming from Germany. They were reflecting a little bit back on that with their what was it there? Pilsner, and the Pilsner, like, you don't realize it, but there is a certain yeast that's being used, and I can't even remember the name of it, but they're using a certain yeast, and like it was awesome, it was delicious, but you could, like, as soon as you took a sip, you're like, that's a Pilsner. But you know, why do you know that in your head as a beer drinker? And it's like, it's because of the yeast. So going into, like, you know, right here we have this, you know, Love and Wrestling by Mayflower. It's a double IPA. Everyone's like, double IPA, okay, that's got to be twice as bitter. It's probably, you know, they think twice the alcohol as well. Well, the only reason why it's a double is because, yes, they're adding more hops, they're adding more of those ingredients in it, and it is bringing up the ABV, but there is no mark. Like, I thought it was like, okay, what makes it a double? Do you guys have an ABV line that you cross? And all the brewers were kind of like, well, not really. It's just kind of like we put a lot more ingredients in, which raises the ABV, but there's no like, okay, once it goes over 8%, now it has to be labeled as a double. And then everyone thinks, well, there's twice as much hops, so it's got to be really bitter. It's the opposite. I actually prefer doubles over and triples over singles because I don't like really bitter as much. And when you're adding more of these hops and stuff, you're actually adding more sugar. And then the yeast is eating the sugar, which is raises the ABV, but you're hitting more of those caramel notes. So now these doubles and triples are actually a little bit sweeter and smoother rather than bitter, which everyone thinks double IPA, double bitterness. No, it's not accurate at all. Yeah, the first time I ever had a beer or tasted a beer was, I want to say I was like probably like 7 or 8, and I was bugging my dad in the backyard. He was mowing the lawn, and I was probably pissing him off, and I always see him having a beer, and he's like, and I think I was just bugging him one day. I was like, can I try that? Thinking, like, as a kid, you think it's just soda. And he finally got so annoyed with me that he was like, sure. And I took a sip, and I remember I almost like threw up right there in the backyard. And he was like, good. And now I know you're never going to be touching my beer when you get older. Well, that was a big mistake. But because now I got the taste. No, I think it was honestly like, I don't even know. I want to say it was like a Busch Light or something like generic. But the first time that I like actually drank with my best friend growing up, it was Labatt's Blue Canadian lager. So that always Labatt's will always have a place in my heart, especially, you know, during, you know, winter, if you watching, you know, some hockey games and you want to have some wings. It's, you know, you got Labatt's, you can't really go wrong with that. Some of the best conversations, I think, happen in many public houses and many bars and breweries. But for me, what really stands out the most is it was 2016, I want to say. I was looking for a new roommate in Seattle, and I did the whole Craigslist thing. Met a roommate on Craigslist who I ended up living with for 3.5 years, Shawn, my boy Shawn Lindefer. He's still out in Washington. He's a brewer himself, but when he moved into my apartment at the time, it was like maybe a couple weeks in, and we didn't even really know each other, but we both liked beer. And he said to me, he's like, would you mind if I brewed in the apartment? And I was like, you know, I think I'd be upset if I knew you knew how to brew and you didn't do it. So he quickly got the nickname Puddles, which, as you can imagine, he was a mad scientist in puddles. So like, I knew Shawn was brewing when I come home. The smell of, basically it smells like banana bread or oatmeal. when you're home brewing, and the floor is sticky. So, but the amount of nights that Shawn and I, he did pretty much, 90% of the work. I was more of the guy who watched over, like the supervisor, if you would, to make sure the apartment didn't burn down or something. But I would help him can, and the bottles, they'd self-carbonate. I'd help them, but we hooked up a kegerator. We started doing forced carbonation. So like, he actually taught me the whole brewing process, and a lot of it was just from sight too, watching him do it. And we had so many good conversations just sitting in our kitchen dining room table, and it was like the beer had just been 2 months in his closet, like fermenting and self-carbonating, and he's like, all right, here we go. And we crack a beer, and you have those moments where you try it, and it was like, well, this is interesting. This isn't the way that you thought it was going to go. And then there was those times where it was like, holy shit, like, this is amazing. And we have to like try to think about the process again. Like, what did you use? How much of this? How much of that? And when it's home brewing, there's like, you can't control the temperature. Like, there's a lot of variables, so you can kind of get close to like making it again. But I think those were the best moments I had, was sitting with my old roommate Shawn, trying a beer that he just came up with, and just kind of talking about the yeast he used, or the what kind of hops it was that time, and what seems to be working and what doesn't work, and just also just like, it was fun. It was his own creations that I got to sit there and try and watch him, and then watch him go work his way through the whole brewing industry. So beer time, how beer time and Hawk Visuals really intersect, and really kind of are on the same playing field, in a sense that Hawk Visuals, our core motto is we want businesses to grow, and in order for them to grow, part of that is sharing their stories and getting their names out there. Whenever you're shopping at any location, or if you're sitting down at a restaurant or anything like that, you feel more connected to those companies when you know more about them, and their backstory and where they came from, and who they are as a person. It's kind of interesting, like I guess when you sit down and eat and you see the owner of the restaurant, you're like, oh, that's the owner, that guy owns the place, and you kind of feel this like connection. You feel more of a connection if you knew who he was, or where he came from. So we try to, like, at Hawk Visuals, we go towards businesses. We seek out what it is they need to, how they can grow socially, and part of that is telling their story. And that's kind of what we're doing with Beer Time. Sitting down with these brewers is like, where did you come from? How did you get into brewing? Why are you doing this? And where do you see the brewery going forward? And I love that. I love that whole concept of being able to share not only the brewery story, but like also all the way down to the head brewer story, or the owner story, why they got into it. And if we can translate that over to the customers, then I think that is beneficial, like tenfold, because now they might pick up a beer and go, oh, I remember seeing, this beer review with the owner, and the reason why this logo is this is because that's his buddy. Like, that's actually, Mighty Squirrel, like a lot of their deer line, it was like logos of all the people in the brewery, and they're like, I was like, oh, that's like an actual person. So like, that's kind of cool. Like, I would have never known that. You would have thought it was just a logo designer just putting a logo on there, and it's like, no, that's actually someone in that brewery. So now it's like there's a piece of that person and that is being put out there in the world, and we get to share that story and enlighten people on those little inside things that you may never knew about that brewery. We're trying to get this beer out there, and hopefully the more reviews I can do, the more I can keep sharing these cool new styles with you guys, and you can all just keep on enjoying beer. Cheers.